I too have received a lot of emails, not quite as many as Councilmember Zell, about 170 at last count. Mine were running about 50-50. And there are several questions that were raised in the emails. I tried to answer as many as I could, but I too was unable to respond to all those emails. One question I would like to ask the city clerk is, how long have you been employed with the city in the clerk's office?
21 years.
And in those 21 years, have we ever had a proclamation come off at consent and had a 3-hour discussion on it?
Not to my knowledge.
And I'd like to ask the city attorney one question that was raised numerous times is, when can we have Christian Day? Would the Constitution and the separation of church and state prohibit this body from having a proclamation for Christian Day?
That's something I'd have to have my staff research. I think when you start opening the door for proclamations, the key point here is you can regulate time, place, and manner, but not content. So if you start denying proclamations based on content, you may be putting yourself in an awkward position that's going to be difficult to defend.
I received an email, as did the rest of the council, and I was requested to read it. City Councilors and Mayor Rosenthal, I am writing to you regarding P1011-3, the proclamation declaring October as Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender History Month. I strongly urge you to vote in favor of the proclamation. It may surprise you to learn that I urge your support for the proclamation as a conservative Republican. I do this because, unlike most who are commenting on the issue, I have actually read the proclamation and believe that it endorses two ideals that are fundamental to me as a conservative: individual and equal rights, and the rejection of government-imposed discrimination. As such, from a conservative point of view, I cannot support any action of government that would debase the natural right of any individual to be treated equally or use its power to discriminate against citizens. Though a rejection of this proclamation would not be explicitly do such a thing, I believe it would do so implicitly by signaling to certain sectors of our society that they cannot expect respect from their city government. I have followed the debate regarding this issue for the past week. Most of the arguments against the motion appear to be based on the belief that the city is endorsing a certain lifestyle. Besides the fact that many critics draw unfounded and unsupported conclusions regarding that lifestyle, nowhere in the proclamation does it indicate an endorsement of any such thing, nor does it support one definition of marriage over another, as some critics have erroneously claimed. What this proclamation does, however, is rightfully recognize the achievements of a certain class of citizens, celebrate a victory for equal rights over state-sponsored discrimination, and acknowledge a bedrock principle of modern democratic nation, which is dignity and respect for all life. This is a proper and honorable thing to do. Though I may not often agree with your decisions you make on city issues, that does not mean I do not appreciate the job each of you do. You must often take up controversial issues that will earn you no goodwill from large sectors of the community. This issue before you is a controversial one, though it should not be. Distilled to its most basic elements, the proclamation is about recognizing individual rights and rejecting division within the community based on fear. Thus, I believe it is worthy of your support. I hope each of you will support the proclamation. Joe Fairbanks, Chair of the Cleveland County Young Republicans. Now, one thing that I want to address, and this is a quote from the American Psychological Association, research suggests that homosexual orientation is placed in the very early stage of life cycle, possibly even before birth. It is found that in about 10% of the population, a figure which is surprisingly constant across cultures, irrespective of the different moral values and standards of a particular culture. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's about people's rights. And this body, in my opinion, should uphold people's rights, as should any government, regardless of whether or not we agree with what those people are doing. That's when you really challenge your convictions. It's easy to agree with people that we agree with. It's easy to stand up for their rights. But it's difficult for people to be asked to stand up for other people. You know, I've heard a lot of people say in these emails, there's no discrimination against gays in Norman. And I'm frankly puzzled as to where they get that information, because there's all sorts of evidence of discrimination. Now, I can understand if you live in the tropics, you may not understand snow, but you know it exists. And let me tell you, discrimination exists. Why are we wasting our time on this? We heard that over and over again. It was put out in one of the emails, and it was forwarded through a chain. I saw the chain. Well, that it's the only time that's being spent on this is the time that the public is asking us to spend on it by having this debate, as Councilmember Ezell pointed out. You know, the Webster defines majority, oddly enough, as the age at which full civil rights are accorded. That's interesting. Somebody said earlier that we shouldn't have special rights for the gays, and I agree. I'll gladly trade you this proclamation for equal rights for homosexuals. If there were equal rights for homosexuals, we wouldn't be having a proclamation today. You wouldn't have gay activists. You wouldn't have people fighting to keep their jobs. You wouldn't have people fighting not to be discriminated against in where they choose to live. Another thing that I hear often is discussed is the sexual aspect of homosexuality. Well, it's in the name, but sexuality is not all there is to being homosexual. Just as there are celibate heterosexuals, there are celibate homosexuals. It's not always about sex. It's about who you're attracted to and who you might fall in love with and who you might want to spend the rest of your life with. Same kinds of values that this community is supporting, the same kind of values that this proclamation is supporting. Good behavior. That's what this proclamation is supporting. Some people have asked, please make this a family, have stated, please make this a family community, or please vote no for the children and for the voting community of Norman. These are quotes from some of the emails. Well, Mary Frances brought up the 13-year-old that shot themselves. There was a 24-year-old college student who was beaten in Claremore on April 27th. There was a child in Ohio just yesterday who had his arm broken because he was perceived to be gay. What about those people's rights? What about those children? What about those members of this community? What about those families? Don't they have the right to be safe? And if you say that there's no discrimination, and the first time in 26 years that the clerk has been here, that we have to have a 2.5-hour conversation over something as simple as a proclamation that gives no legislative action. That is itself a underscoring of the fact that it's needed. I understand that it's hard to perceive what it's like to be in the minority if you're in the majority. But we've all had the experience of being the outsider. And I ask you to try to remember that. Have you ever stepped into an